Hello and welcome to a new interview from MinnMax. MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better. My name is Ben Hansen, and this is an interview with Giles Goddard from Chuhai Labs. They are releasing a game very soon called Carve Snowboarding for the Oculus Quest. But Giles has a very interesting history. He's returning to snowboarding with this game because he's also a programmer and lead creative voice for 1080 back on the Nintendo 64. But that's not all. This is the programmer who created the opening to Super Mario 64 with the stretchy Mario face thing. He obviously was a programmer on Star Fox as well, working with Dylan Cuthbert, who's now at Q Games. He has an incredible history seeing inside of Nintendo, working with Miyamoto, working with some of the greatest minds. In this interview, we talk about his time at Nintendo, and he also talks about developing the earliest prototype for Ocarina of Time, which was just Zelda on the Nintendo 64. And he tells a story which is bizarre and fascinating about how an early prototype for that game actually involved portals, much like the game Portal. So he's a very quiet guy, very subdued guy, but he has an incredible history in the video game industry, and hopefully this interview brings some of that to light. If you enjoy content like this, you can help support it by subscribing to MinnMax's YouTube channel. We have more interviews that are in this vein. We have The Deepest Dive, which is our huge community game club. We covered Super Mario 64 and created the best, most thorough discussion about the game on the internet. There's a lot of other good stuff. And also, if you support us over on Patreon at patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's, you can unlock the podcast version of this interview, The Deepest Dives, early access to the MinnMax Show podcast, and a bunch of other benefits. But without further ado, here's Giles Goddard. Giles Goddard, welcome to MinnMax, sir.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
It's an honor to have you. How's everything going over there? What's your life like these days?
What is it like? So I spend half my time in an island down in South Japan. So it's kind of, COVID isn't really a thing when I come here. And when I go back to Kyoto, it's sort of, everybody's sort of, trying to avoid each other and all that sort of stuff. But it's quite a good balance because, I can really concentrate on work down on the island, and I go back to Kyoto and I can meet up with people, socially distancing.
Yeah. How'd you find this? How'd you find the island?
How did I find it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I came here like 20, 25 years ago on just like a random thing. And I've just sort of loved it ever since. And I have my own place here and everything.
That sounds ideal. I think you might have cracked the code for the game industry is, you can focus, you can make some cool indie games, and then just half the time go live on an island off of Japan in a rural area.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've been trying to start an office down here for ages, but it's an acquired lifestyle, I think, because you don't have any of the amenities like konbini. In Japan, you have the konbini everywhere. Convenience stores.
Ah, gotcha.
You don't have those here, so if you have to make your own food, you have to catch your own food sometimes because there's because you can't get into town or whatever.
Wait.
So I know it's kind of an acquired. No, it's not for everybody.
Yeah. So the rest of Chuhai Labs, they're in Kyoto then?
Yeah. Everybody apart from me is in Kyoto.
Okay.
And I sort of balance half Kyoto, half Ishigaki.
Do you have are you gonna have like a big? I don't want to, force this on you, but when you launch Carve Snowboarding, you're going to invite everybody down to the island. Is it like a get-together spot for you? Or is this like, this is where I need to just clear my head and not worry about numbers for a while?
This is where I come to avoid people.
Yeah.
So, occasionally we do get visitors down here, and I sort of take them around to the sites, whatever. But it's hard to get everybody down here all in one place.
Yeah, I understand.
It's much easier just to sort of, have a party or whatever in Kyoto than it is down here.
Yeah, absolutely. I assume you're aware that you have an incredibly fascinating career. Yes? Do you ever look back on your own life and just say, wow, I have experienced a lot of this industry?
To be honest, no. Because it's not really a thing I dwell on. It's just I don't like thinking about what I've already done. I like thinking about new things. So it's not a thing I think about now.
Yeah. You don't.
So people have to remind me. Actually, sometimes I have to go to my wiki page when somebody asks me what games I did or when I did what. I have to go to the wiki page to check it out because it's actually quite accurate. And I don't know who made it, but it's pretty good.
And what do you think that is? It's just being a programmer. You're always focused on details and moving into the future and trying to push boundaries. And so the idea of like, I'm not going to write an autobiography at some point.
Well, you make a game or whatever, and you almost hate the game by the time you finished it. Because it's just been in your head for so long. You want to get it out and move on to something else. So, every time that happens, you want to think about the new thing, not dwell on the past kind of thing.
Yeah.
I saw a great interview with Gary Newman the other day. I don't know if you know about him.
No, I don't think so.
Gary Newman, a UK synth pop legend from the 80s.
Okay.
He's kind of reinvented his career sort of in the last sort of 10 years, whatever. And all of his new stuff is really, really good. It's very, very sort of fresh and, as good as the old stuff. And his fans are always trying to get him to play the old stuff when he goes to concerts. And he just says, no, I'm just going to play my new stuff. Because, that is his career. It's the thing that he wants to do. So it's kind of the same with me. I just want to move forward, even though with this Carve Snowboarding is kind of like a homage to 1080. It's still something totally fresh and new.
Yeah. And does that come from, I don't know, a marketing angle to some degree of like, okay, I'm known for 1080. Maybe I can use that in some way. It's a good, wall of text on a trailer to be like, from the programmer of 1080.
I think that was definitely an afterthought, because I've always wanted to make a VR snowboarding game, because snowboarding fits VR so well, especially for the Quest, because you don't have any wires attached. So you put it on, you can look anywhere while you're controlling the board. So it just fits snowboarding so well. So yeah, ever since the DK1, I've been wanting to make one. So yeah, the creative 1080, whatever, that's like an after. That's by the PR team that did that. Nothing to do with me.
Did you have conversations though about calling it like 1440?
Jokingly, yes, but we don't want to get sued by Nintendo, so we don't do that.
Can they really? Is that like the number? Do you really think they come down on a number like that? That's ambiguous enough.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. You could argue that 1080 snowboarding is a trademark, and therefore, some other number snowboarding is also too similar or something. Yeah. Too confusing for the consumer.
It gets messy. So, I mean, now that you're done with Carve Snowboarding, how do you feel after dreaming about it since DK1? Now it's ready to go, right?
It's great. It's kind of surreal that now it's actually a proper game. But it's really fun. I can't wait until people actually get to try it. All the people that have actually tried it, they've kind of been blown away by how well it controls. So I'm quite excited to see what people think of it.
Yeah, and I get nauseated easily. Am I just going to be a wreck for this game?
Say again?
I get nauseated easily playing games. Is this going to destroy me?
So that was my biggest concern from the start, and that's probably the number one worry that most people have before playing the game. But the way we've made it is it's actually extremely comfortable. On the range of sort of vomit-inducing to sort of very relaxing, it's kind of way towards the relaxing. Just because the way we treat the camera, we never move the camera, rotate the camera, or have sort of sudden jerky movements or sudden accelerations. It's very smooth. It just doesn't cause the discomfort you get on other games.
Yeah, oh, that's nice. How's the VR business these days? How is it making a game for Oculus?
It's fantastic. I can't wait to do more. I mean, it really is such a great platform to work on.
Just because it feels fresh and exciting and new?
It's the possibilities just seem endless with the Quest, especially because it's wireless. You can walk around wherever you want. You can play wherever you want. You can have a room full of 50 people all on Quests networked together. Nobody's done that, but you could do that if you wanted to. So there's so many things you could do with the Quest. It's really exciting. Yeah.
Are you working with Jason Rubin then, or has he been promoted to the point that he's not reaching out to developers as much anymore?
Oh, I think he's way above us.
Okay.
Minions.
He's got some confusing title, Facebook Games Czar or something like that. I can't quite track.
Isn't he like number one or number two in Facebook or something like that?
I don't know. You could say that and I would believe you. I have no idea where he's at.
I'm pretty sure he reports to Mark Zuckerberg.
That's absurd. That's amazing. I was very excited to see that Michael Swaim, who now I guess works at IGN, right? That he's a voice in Carve Snowboarding, where it's like, I was a big fan of his podcast about Kurt Vonnegut. It's like, oh, weird. The idea of him being in a game is a novel idea.
Yeah, so I didn't know, being a Brit, didn't know about him. Our PR guy, Mark Lentz, he said, we got this great guy to do the voices on it. And I thought, it's going to be okay. Well, then I heard the stuff. It's fantastic. It's really, really good. It just adds so much to the game. He's in the cabin, basically.
Okay.
Without giving too much away.
Okay. Yeah, no spoilers, please. So, I mean, I know you don't like to dwell on the past, but developing a snowboarding game, you must have thought about 1080 a lot in the development, right? I mean, imagine other developers are asking you questions about how you did this, how you did that, what the design philosophy was.
Yeah. We didn't want to copy it, but we wanted to have the same sort of DNA. So I think, even though it's a VR game, the control scheme is completely different. It still feels like 1080 because you can feel the different snow types. And you have control over your board, and you really feel like you're playing a snowboard. Using a snowboard, well, standing on a snowboard almost.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that similarity. We have a cabin that we kind of always wanted to put in, that you can just chill out and then sort of select your board and look at your boards and stuff. And the two basic modes we have, time attack, which is just to get down as fast as possible, and then trick mode, which is basically to not get down as quick as possible and just do cool tricks.
Yeah.
Which are the two different types of snowboarding you have in real life. Basically, is go as fast as you can or just have fun. For me, that's all you really need out of a snowboarding game is those two very separate styles.
Yeah. Keep it clean, keep it simple, for sure. When you look back on the development of 1080, what kind of defines that era for you? What's the most memorable section of developing that game in your mind?
Of that game in particular, or that era?
I guess for 1080 in particular.
I think the amount of tweaking and fine tuning that went into the controls and the courses, the routes down the courses. In Carve, it feels like it's very free roaming. You can go anywhere, but we've actually sort of really, really finely tuned all the different routes you can go down the mountain. We have one mountain with 6 different areas, basically.
Yeah.
And 1080 was very much like that. Every stage had a different sort of feel or theme and a different way of snowboarding almost. We've really sort of tried to make it as curated as possible, but make it still feel like you're discovering the mountain as you go along. So it's in a way, that's what I remember most about 1080. That sort of just like the way it felt like you were sort of exploring the mountain and learning how to control the game at the same time.
Yeah. Did so Miyamoto, I think, was a producer on 1080. Do you remember any big input that he had on the design of the game or big thoughts?
Yeah, the biggest input he had was when you land. He suggested to pull the trigger to bend your knees to soften the landing. And at the time, I put it in and it worked. And I thought, well, what's the point doing this? I mean, it's not, because he was talking about this for weeks, fine tuning it and trying to get it right and everything. And I never really understood how important it would have been. But then, watching people play it later on, they use that all the time as a way of sort of, obviously not falling over, but sort of, it's just another level of control that sort of maps directly to real life. Because, in real life, you would bend your knees before you land, otherwise you'd break your knees and fall over. So you have to consciously think about that before you land. So it's sort of taking that and putting it into a control scheme. And it works really well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you have more insight into the mind of Miyamoto than most people who speak English. And I know you're probably sick to death of talking about this guy that you used to work with, 30 years ago or whatever. But do you feel like you understand Miyamoto pretty well after spending so many times, so much time just on smoke breaks and stuff with the guy? Do you feel like you get the idea, or is there something that you still can't quite figure out about his brilliance?
I don't think anybody really gets him completely, because he can be quite unpredictable, and he doesn't explain some of the motives behind his decisions, I think, sometimes. And he kind of lets the person implementing it figure it out along the way. It's almost like he's sort of 10 steps ahead, and he doesn't need to really explain all the steps that he got there to the person that's implementing it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But I've worked with him sort of 20 years ago, and I haven't really since. So I mean, that's a very different time, and I'm sure he's moved on. He's a different. I think he's less of a game designer now, and obviously less of a game designer, more of a sort of advisory board member type thing there.
Yeah,
and he has been for quite a few years.
For sure, yeah. Do you feel like him being 10 steps ahead, not needing to explain himself? I'd imagine that's a frustrating thing for a lot of people on the ground floor. Then of just like, I don't know what this guy is talking about. I guess I'll try and take a stab at this, but that's just core to his brilliance. Is he just needs to keep moving ahead and not explain everything to everybody.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a part of it. Another part is that he loves to try out an idea, go with it for a while, and then if it doesn't work, he'll just throw it away. Which for a lot of programmers, that's a really hard thing to do, is to basically throw away a month's worth of work.
Yeah.
A lot of programmers I know would just get really angry about that. But you have to, working with something like that, you have to not learn to not get too attached with code and stuff.
Yeah. How did you fare on that front? Because even when you're coming in, I'm imagining you're a fan of every game that's come before, even though it's the early days of the Super Nintendo when you start working with them. And so did you have to kind of check your ego every once in a while about, well, I'm a programmer, but this guy made Mario, so I'll go with it?
No, I don't think I did, because I started, when I was a kid, 18, working with them. So I didn't really have an ego, much of an ego, because I just hadn't made any games at that point. So I sort of grew up with him, with Nintendo almost. So I just assumed that's how you made games. I never really knew any other way of making games.
Yeah. There's a swarm of birds, by the way, coming through your window, just in case you weren't aware of it.
Yeah. I might get my shotgun out in a minute.
That's lovely. So you've worked with Nintendo, I mean, for years now. Would you like to keep that relationship rolling into the future? Would you like to develop more games for the Switch even?
I mean, they're a very different company now, Nintendo. I mean, they have changed a lot since Iwata-san passed away. I like the company. There's a lot of really cool people that still work there, and I'm friends with them, whatever. But they do very different games internally now. They don't really sort of do the second party, third party tie-up thing anymore. So if we did work with them, they would only be a publisher. Or they would only, they would. I don't think they'd actually be involved with making a game with us.
How involved were they with stuff like Tank Troopers and Steel Diver? Do you feel like that was already kind of the new era? Well,
that was like a transition era. That was like the last of the second party type of games that they made, I think. So we were very much making their game for them.
Yeah. How do you feel about... go ahead.
We were just sort of... we were like an extension of EAD, basically. EAD being the department within NCL that made all the famous games.
Yeah. How do you feel about Steel Diver in retrospect?
I love it. I think we all really wish we could have kept the multiplayer mode in. We actually had it working. It was fine. It worked really well. We tested it, and then they decided to take it out for some unknown reason. So that's my only regret is we didn't push back hard enough to keep that in. And also we had a Switch version that was running. It was perfect. It looked really, really cool, really high res. But they didn't think it was worth sort of putting it out on Switch, which is kind of disappointing.
Yeah. So it was a port of the original Steel Diver on Switch then, or?
No, it wasn't really a port. We had we had our own sort of rendering engine called the Sagi, and it was multi-platform basically. So it worked on 3DS or PC or Switch, but it was kind of like Unreal, where you could sort of dial back or dial in the texture sizes and the LODs and all that. So you could have a very high-res Switch version and also a very low-res 3DS version with the same code. So it was more of a sort of a dual. We were making the same game, the game on multi-platform.
Well, I'm confused about that timeline then. I mean, it was a launch 3DS game, right? So how does that work for the Switch timeline?
Well, I mean, it took a long time to make Tank Troopers, and there was lots of iterations. So obviously our engine was running on PC and 3DS at the start.
Yeah.
Later on, when the Switch came about, we sort of ported it to the Switch, ported the engine to the Switch so we could run on the Switch. And then we started upgrading the textures and upgrading the models and all that, with the intention of releasing it on the Switch at some point.
Gotcha. So once Tank Troopers was done, then you went back to Steel Diver to bring it up to speed on the Switch.
Sorry, which were you talking about? Steel Diver or Tank Troopers?
Oh, sorry, I was talking about Steel Diver. You were talking about Tank Troopers the whole time on the Switch?
Okay, yeah. Okay, I always get the names. Did you say Tank Troopers or
I'll
Steel
go back
Diver?
and check the tape. I could have messed that up. So
right.
Tank Troopers is what you're talking about the whole time.
Tank Troopers is the one with the multiplayer.
Yes. Okay.
3DS. It should have been multiplayer. We had it working, and we had a Switch version. It was really cool. It worked really cool. Steel Diver was before that. Yeah, that was a 3DS only game, and then we had Sub Wars, which is the next version of that on 3DS with proper 3D and everything.
Yes.
And then after that, we did Tank Troopers.
Gotcha.
I think I'm going to have to check my wiki page of this.
Just have it up in the background. Yeah, I totally get it. I gotcha. Before we leave 1080 fully behind, I wanted to ask about the soundtrack to 1080. It's really unique. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but Kenta Nagata for the composer there, who went on to went on to work on Wind Waker, Mario Kart, Pokemon Stadium, a lot of great stuff like that. Do you remember having discussions with him, or was the music kind of out of your purview at the time? Because it's so unique for his discography. Yeah, I mean, he was a really good friend of mine when I was working there. And I used to sort of go into his little studio, because he had a little studio at the back of the AD, and I used to sort of hang out there and see what he was doing. So I saw a lot of the recording of that sort of going on, and sort of gave him I guess critique at the time. And I remember I think it was our assistant director, maybe did the voices on one of the tracks, like the really hard track. What about like the classic, the iconic Work Your Body track? Was that also the assistant director jumping in there?
No, I think that was just some sample he got from somewhere.
Okay, perfect.
I think.
Do you ever go back and listen to that soundtrack?
No, not at all.
Okay,
no.
All right. Not a man who dwells in the past. What about like new versions of the past? Like, did you play Super Mario 3D All-Stars on the Switch to go back to Mario 64?
So I bought it to play it, but we got so busy with Carve that I haven't actually managed to unwrap the box yet.
Wow. Well, that'll be fun when you finally get around.
I'm looking forward to actually sort of sitting down and playing it again properly.
Yeah.
So I literally haven't played it since it came out, I think.
What? Are you serious?
I mean, how often do you go back and play old games? I mean,
people that are watching this interview probably go back and do that a lot. We had a 10-hour long conversation about Super Mario 64 right when the 3D All-Stars came out for MinnMax here. We call it the deepest dive. So we really talked the hell out of that game. And I know you're.
I guess it's because I don't have much time to play games. So if I play a game, it's going to be. I have to choose very wisely which game I'm going to play. So I don't have time to sort of play all the games I want to play.
Yeah, of course, that makes sense. I'm sure you've told the story 1,000 times, and I apologize. But can you walk us through the story about Super Mario 64's opening and the face, the Mario face tweaking? I don't know what the hell you call that.
Rubber banding.
Rubber band.
So I guess the quick story is that when we were designing the software and the hardware for the N64 with SGI gave us indie computers, which were these really cool sort of flat, state-of-the-art supercomputers almost. And they gave us all indies and indigos, and we had an Onyx machine, which is like a big supercomputer, emulating the hardware. And they all came with these little cameras. And at the time, webcams weren't a thing. Cameras attached to PCs weren't a thing. So it was kind of mind-blowing to have a thing where you could see yourself and modify the image in code in real time. So I was just playing around, seeing if I could sort of detect my hand, whatever. I didn't have the coding ability to do that. So I thought, what if I just detected blobs of color on the screen? So I managed to do that. And I thought, well, I could have some kind of motion capture thing going on here. So I put some ping pong balls on my face, asked a guy, Koizumisan actually, I think, to make the Mario face with bones in it. And we were also experimenting with skinning models back then. Skinning is basically where you have a bone structure with polygons on top, and when you move the bone, the polygons move with it. I mean, now it's kind of de facto standard, but back then it was all very new tech, I guess. Back then you'd be able to see the joints when polygons move, you could see the joins, and it was very sort of unsightly. So we were trying to find a way around that, basically. So we combined the skinning with the IK of the bones and the motion capture. And I basically had Mario face attached to, shown on the indie with me, moving around doing this with my mouth, whatever. And then Miyamoto walks past and said, "Oh, that's pretty cool. Let's put it in Mario." And we did. And then he sort of suggested, what about being able to sort of pull it with a hand and stretch and all that sort of stuff?
And the idea of like actually being able to lock it into place and freeze it in place there as well? We just played all around with it. It was such a cool little fun project to do because we were just playing with all these ideas. And I think somebody just suggested being able to sort of freeze it to make it look stupid. Yeah, I love that idea of Miyamoto just being like, oh, we'll find someplace for it. And now it's just like the iconic opening of one of the greatest games of all time. It's such a good testament for just everything that was and is great about Nintendo of like, here's this technical powerhouse, and then we'll just let you play and use it as a toy. Go.
Yeah, I mean, that basically sums up the way they make games. And it's because they're not afraid of overrunning budgets or time limits if they think it's worth it. They just try all the ideas and then see which ones stick, see which ones are fun, see which ones don't work, whatever. And they're not afraid of doing it. And it can be frustrating, but it's how Nintendo make their games.
So for every iconic face in the openings from Mario 64, there are 17 other projects that your other coworkers were working on that didn't quite make the cut, that were just as weird and funky.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had all sorts of because I was in the R&D department, which was literally right next to the Mario guys. I think the lead programmer was sitting next to me or behind me at that time. We were all doing little projects, and it just so happened that Miyamoto had been walking past at that particular time and saw the stuff. But don't forget, because we're all in the same room, we're all working on the same kind of code, we were using the same APIs. There was a lot of this sharing going on. There's quite a bit of my code in Mario 64 that, was shared with other projects like 1080 or I know Wave Race and stuff like that. It was all just one big happy family of code sharing, I guess.
Yeah. So how much did you code on Mario 64, the gameplay then? Was it just kind of the face stuff, or was it all just such a mix that you couldn't even tell? I honestly can't remember. If something needed helping out here and there, we'd help out, whatever. And we were developing the libraries and the APIs that everybody was using at the same time. So I get everybody had a bit of their fingers in other projects at that time. Yeah. What do you remember about the other programmers at the time? Were you in awe of them? Was everybody on about roughly equal playing field, or were they doing things with Mario 64 that was tough to wrap your head around?
I felt sorry for them, to be honest, because they were working so hard for so long on such an important game. The pressure and the responsibility was so high for them. I think a few of them actually quit and moved into different departments after that because they couldn't handle the stress. But I remember that, the lead programmer, he's legendary within EAD at least.
Yeah, and what was his name?
Yeah. Nishida, I can't remember his first name. Yeah.
Sure, that's fine. But so the stress, is that just long hours? Is that a matter of, people higher up from them just coming in and being like, nope, this isn't working, let's retry this?
Yeah, those two things. The stress of timelines, time limits of knowing you have to get this done for this deadline, otherwise something's going to happen. The fact that this was a deal breaker for the N64. If it wasn't a mega hit, it would have killed the N64. Just all the stresses of making a launch title, I guess, for Nintendo, for the biggest game company on the planet at the time.
Yeah. And so what does that look like? I mean, you're all hanging out, going out to lunch, going out to dinner, and just they're unpacking, or is it just something you quietly observe in the office? It's like, hey, I don't think that person left last night.
It's very subdued, very Japanese. Nobody really expresses their emotions very much. But you just see them there 24 hours a day sometimes, just behind their desks. Some of them sleep under their desks. And they all looked very tired all the time.
Yeah. How do you feel about that?
There's not a very good life-work balance in Japan, put it that way. And there certainly wasn't at that time.
Right. I mean, in retrospect, you look at it and just say, well, that was just a huge problem on management's part. Or is there a part of you that thinks like, well, that type of dedication is what it takes to create a Super Mario 64 at the time?
Yeah, I'm in two minds about that. I know you can argue that the reason they made such amazing games was because people were willing to do that. And that's what it takes to make those kind of games. But I think there's also a healthier way of making games. Yeah.
And you feel like you've hit that now with Chuhai?
I think I know now what not to do on a project or with a company or with a game or whatever. And I know that it's treating your fellow workers with treating them like adults and not like sort of just workers is the only way you can stop them from, or keep them happy basically. Otherwise, they're just going to burn out or move on or quit or whatever. And they're your biggest asset in any company. And I feel with Nintendo, a lot of the time they relied on the fact that everybody wanted to work for Nintendo.
Of course.
So if they lost a few programs along the way, well, whatever, they just got 1,000 more waiting in the wings kind of thing. But with a small company, you can't really do that. So yeah, you have to work healthily in a small company, I think.
Yeah. How unhealthy were you back in the day at Nintendo? Do you feel like you were pushing yourself just as much as the rest of the team?
When it mattered, yes, but we were always getting told off for not doing this and that, or coming in late, or being the unruly gaijin sometimes, gaijin being foreigner. So I always tried to dial back the amount of stress that was going on. But also a lot of it is mismanagement, time management. People going down the wrong route just for the sake of some guy or whatever. Some manager decides to do that, even though nobody knows it's wrong. They go down that route, waste a month, whatever, and then go back. So I've always tried to avoid that, making 1080. And I think it was quite a streamlined, focused game because of that.
Yeah. Here's a weird question. How scary was Miyamoto? When you were programming back in the early days of the 64 and you heard him coming down the hallway, was it like, oh, sweet Jesus, no?
No, he wasn't. He's not scary at all.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, he's. I mean, I don't know whether it was just because I know he can be very brutal with other people, but he was never really that brutal with us. I know he can be very, very mean to, not mean, what's the word, firm with his subordinates sometimes.
Yeah, I've been really fascinated by this project that there's still a lot of confusion about. And I know it was happening in Tokyo, but I'm wondering if you have any insight into the Jack and Beans project. Do you remember this? They eventually created Pokemon Snap, but it was pitched as like, oh, this dream team or Iwata's going to work on it. And I'm sorry, Itoi from Earthbound was going to work on it and build up this new team that could do anything for the 64. Do you remember anything about that, even though it wasn't exactly in your office? Do you remember any discussions or anything?
Vaguely remember that, but yeah, I don't. When was that? 94, did you say?
Yeah, probably around 95, I think is when they announced it.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I do remember, the Tokyo lot being very different from, almost a completely different company, basically. They didn't come down here often. We didn't go up there very often. So.
Gotcha. What is this about a Zelda demo you worked on early for the 64?
Oh, the Shishinkai thing. Yeah. So that would have been, at the start of when they were just first developing the prototypes for Zelda. I think they wanted to show something because they announced the game and they wanted to show that they were actually had a game there, even though they had nothing there.
Sure.
So we knocked up a game with Koizumi-san. We knocked up a little demo of him, fighting a metallic character, whatever, with all these effects and stuff going on to show off. It's the same thing where all these demos were always showing off some bit of new tech, and I think at that point it was floating real-time lights. We had 3 lights that were spinning around, particle effects and environment mapping.
And so was that in any way then taken into Ocarina of Time, or Ocarina's development was it its own siloed thing and you were just there at the start to create this tech demo of what it could be?
Yeah. We were just basically making a sort of a demo of what it could look like, very completely separate from the actual game. But it's funny you mentioned that because recently I found an old directory of source code that I sort of backed up, and it was the first map of Zelda, 64 Zelda, just with the castle, Hyrule Castle, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I was doing all these experiments. Like you can have a portal where you could look through, go in, and then you get teleported to a different part of the map. You could see through a door to a different part of the map, walk through it, and then walk back through it. If you see what I mean. It was very cool tech, and I had it running and showed some guys at the office. And they said, "Well, you've got to put this on the internet." And I said, "Well, I can't really because it's not my property; it's Nintendo's." But yeah, you just reminded me about that.
Okay, hang on. This is mind-blowing. So this was for Ocarina then, or is also just this playable tech demo? You had the portal tech for that?
It was R&D for the game, basically. It was what could we do with the hardware on the N64. And this was basically a demo of portals, actual portals that you could see through to other parts of the map.
Yeah. I mean, were you reminded of this when Portal came out in 2007? Were you like, hey, that was my Ocarina of Time idea? When I saw Portal, I thought, oh, actually, I had that running on the N64. I should have released it then. Because literally I didn't have guns where you shoot the thing, but we had these spinning crystals that you sort of pick up and you move around. And if you spinned it, you could see through a different part of the map, depending on how you spun the crystal. And if you walked through, you'd actually go into the map. You'd pull it into yourself like that. Yeah.
And you'd be there. It was quite cool tech, actually.
Do you remember the reason they didn't pull it into the full Ocarina project?
I don't think they ever saw it. That's probably why.
How does that work? How do you spend so much time making something so cool as a tech demo for what Zelda could be on the 64 and then they don't see it?
I don't know, because it's very hard to, a game like Zelda is this massive juggernaut moving along in its own sort of course. And if you sort of say, here's some cool tech, whatever, they're going to say, oh, that's really cool, but there's no way we can implement that in this thing now. It's too late, or it's going to cause too much confusion or disruption. Maybe. So it's very hard to sort of introduce new tech later on in the game. It's quite easy at the start, but not later on.
Yeah. Do you remember any other strange prototypes you're working on in those early days for Zelda?
Light mapping. I had light mapping working on that Zelda map. It wasn't very fast. I remember I did it after seeing it was Unreal, actually, with the cool lighting, the shadows, whatever, in Unreal. The fact you could shoot a gun and you could see the walls light up as it went down the corridor. I always thought that was so cool. So I made a sort of demo in the Zelda map where you could go around with this light gun shooting colored balls. And it looked really cool, but it was quite memory intensive and quite slow.
Wow, that's absurd. So
and I guess there was a few other things like sort of water reflections and stuff like that. But basically, each room had a different tech demo, if you like.
Yeah.
Each room of the castle.
This is dorky, but do you remember like where just the design of the castle came from? Like, were you just like looking at Link to the Past and then just, I don't know, we'll build something in 3D that kind of looks like that? Or was there concept art for what Zelda 64 would eventually look like?
Yeah, I think they were just basically looking at the old 2D Zeldas and thinking, what would this look like in 3D and that kind of thing. It's the same sort of technique that they did with Mario 64. They'd look at the old 2D Marios and say, well, if this was 3D, what would it look like?
Yeah.
So, I think most of their inspiration would have come from the 2D.
Gotcha. Here's a very specific question. I remember one time I got to interview Tezuka and talked a little bit about Link to the Past, and he talked about how he came on as the director of that project like halfway through. This is a deep cut, but do you have any idea who the original director for Link to the Past was?
I remember when he took over, actually. I'm trying to think who was doing it before him. Doesn't it say somewhere on Wikipedia?
No, this is the problem with video game history, is it does not say anywhere. They do not talk much about this.
I don't offhand, but I'm pretty sure I can remember it if given enough time. I just go through all the people that were on that.
Yeah, so it wasn't Miyamoto directing it and then handing it over to Tezuka.
No, it wasn't Aonuma's hand, was it?
Aonuma? I don't think so. I think he came on later. I think was 64 his first, I think? Oh, you know this better than I do.
I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'll see if I can remember that.
Okay. Sure.
Find out.
I mean, that's amazing that you have some insight into Zelda's development. I mean, I think just your perspective on what that office was like is so unique because we all don't understand how these things were siloed, which teams are working together. Can you give any like more idea of just what that office is like, how much the teams mingled together?
Well, we had the old Nintendo office basically had two big buildings, one which was hardware and one which was software. And there was sort of and a third building which was SRD, which is the sort of the other branch of Nintendo. And we were basically, EAD was one entire floor, and we had, I guess, the Mario. I'm trying to think, did we have Zelda or not on that floor? I can't remember. I don't know. But we had all the sort of the famous EAD games all in one room, basically. So you'd have rows of people, and usually a game per 2 rows or one row, whatever, depending on the size of the game. So Wave Race there, Mario 64 there. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, so I guess what, sort of 50 to 100 people in that room.
Okay.
And that was EAD. So EAD was one room, and then below that there would have been, one of the R&D studios that was working on, say, the APIs and stuff like that. And then you'd also have, actually, the EAD was 2 floors. I'm trying to think. And then in the other building you have the hardware guys doing all the sort of the soldering and the actual sort of R&D of the hardware.
Okay.
And then, an SRD, which was a separate building. I think they were totally separate company, but everybody thought they were just another branch of EAD.
So wandering around EAD, do you remember the biggest shocking moment? Do you remember seeing a game for the first time or tech for the first time and your jaw hitting the floor?
I remember when we had the Onyxes, the big SGI supercomputers. I don't know if you know about those. They're about this big, size of a fridge.
Yeah.
And they were emulating the hardware of the N64. So you'd make a ROM on your workstation. You'd take it to the Onyx and you'd play it, and it would actually be running in real time. In software, but it was actually running hardware, and it was kind of mind-blowing to sort of have that. It was a true supercomputer in our hours kind of thing.
And what's the benefit of that versus just like a dev unit of the N64?
Because it was changing so much. If you have dev units like that, you can't iterate and change as quickly as you can if you're just basically emulating this stuff. And they didn't know what kind of hardware they were going to make, so they were basically they had to sort of emulate it first to make sure it all worked, and then actually make the hardware.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. How many, what are your personal archives like from that time? You mentioned you have the source code for that Zelda thing. Do you have...
really pretty bad, actually, because you don't really think that any of this stuff is going to be any use in 20 years' time. It's
right.
You make it at the time it works, you throw it away, kind of thing. You never think at the time any of this is going to be useful. Things like, I know all the sort of weird prototype bits of hardware we had. Wish I kept a few of those things because they would have been quite interesting. Like the old prototype. I'm not saying I'd steal them.
Of course.
Look after them or something. Put them in a vault or something. The old prototype N64 controllers that we went through. It would have been cool to sort of have a reminder of some of those.
Do you remember anything about any of the prototypes?
We had so many different prototypes, or I saw so many different prototypes, different shapes, different control schemes. I remember one time a company from the UK came over with a haptic feedback type sort of stick, the thumbstick on the N64, the controller on the N64.
Yeah.
So their tech allowed the thumbstick to sort of not move in a particular direction after a time, if you know what I mean. So like almost like a wall. So it would move up to there and then not move if you wanted it to.
Okay.
And then you could sort of turn that off and it would start moving again. So it was like you could control where it moved, almost.
Almost like the PS5 haptic trigger types thing?
Almost. It was,
okay.
Yeah, it was like force feedback, but without the sort of forcing back. It was more like a wall.
Okay.
You don't need... And, one of the ideas was that when Mario is up against the wall, to give the impression that he can't move past the wall, you'd sort of block the control up to that point.
Oh, interesting.
So it would feel like you couldn't move any further. And it worked as a piece of tech with some demos, but when you actually try to implement it in a game, it didn't really match. It didn't really suit any concept in a game that we could think of.
That just seems if
that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems like a nightmare to actually integrate into a game. Like creating Mario 64 is hard enough. Can you imagine going up to those programmers and be like, okay, now this controller is very specific and it'll bounce off every surface. Oh my God.
Yeah, let alone all the sort of reliability issues they would have had with, sticks breaking and, just general problems with that.
Oh yeah. Do you remember seeing like the 3-pronged 64 controller for the first time?
Yeah, I thought it was a great idea because you could be left or right-handed, and it didn't matter, sort of thing. Which I remember thinking at the time it was weird that Japan, a Japanese company would come up with an ambidextrous controller like that, because Japan is famous for not having any left-handed people.
For not what?
Not having left-handed people.
Is it Miyamoto left-handed?
Yeah, but he's basically in school. It gets sort of drilled out of you whether you like it or not. So you can be left-handed. It's just you have to be right-handed in order to sort of get a job in Japan almost. So you keep quiet if you're left-handed in Japan. And just say I'm right-handed.
So that's why
it's kind of like a disability almost, I think.
And that's why maybe it was like a source of pride for Miyamoto to be like, I made it through the system left-handed, so that's why Link's going to be left-handed, damn it.
And I think that's one of the reasons for the controller, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting.
So you could hold it in either hand. I don't know if he's ever mentioned that anywhere, but I always thought that was also my brother's left-handed. I remember the hassle that he had at school trying to write with a fountain pen, because I don't know if writing left hand with a fountain pen, you're digging into the paper.
Right.
You're not pulling it along, you're digging in. So I thought it was really cool that now there's a controller that my brother can use in the game, because it's either way.
And
I do remember Miyamoto sort of saying at some point, regretted not having the same buttons on the left and right side so that it was switchable completely.
That's really
you had a D-pad on one side and the yellow buttons on the other side. I think he wanted D-pad on both sides instead of the yellow buttons.
Oh, weird. Okay. Huh. This is fascinating stuff. I know it seems banal to you because you lived it, but the idea of your mind and the source code you have, I mean, that's incredible history, and I hope you get to do something with it someday.
Yeah. Some people at work have been saying I should do something with that source, but I don't want to get kneecapped by Nintendo or sued by them. So.
Yeah, of course. But you actually could get it up and running? Like you got it up and running recently?
Well, it was up and running, yeah, on a PC, which is quite amazing, actually.
Yeah. Dumb question. I mean, what did Link look like in this tech demo? Is it just a mannequin?
I think the Link, I didn't actually look at Link, but I think it would have been the Shoshinkai demo Link.
Okay.
The sort of the one we used in that demo.
Is that demo online anywhere?
There's a video of it.
Okay, yeah.
But it wouldn't have been. It would have only been a video. It would never been released.
Right. Okay, as long as the video's out there at least. That's absolutely amazing. Anything else you want to say, sir? Anything? Have I jogged any other memories that you want to get off your chest about that era?
Any nightmares coming back? I don't know. Not that I can think of.
Okay.
Not that I can think of.
Well, that's totally fair. I know you would hate it, but I hope someday you consider writing a book or something.
I think it's all out there on the internet. Everything I've said tonight is out there on the internet, so I think.
I don't think that's true. I think there's still a lot that people could wring out of you. If you just get some ghostwriter, they'll take care of the whole thing, man. It'll be a piece of cake.
It is funny that, when people ask me questions, I remember some other thing that triggers another memory of other things. So maybe if I just keep doing these interviews, I might actually remember enough to string some of this together.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, hey, Carve Snowboarding, when is it coming out?
Very soon. Very, very soon. Within a matter of days, weeks. Okay. I can't say exactly when, but very, very soon.
Okay, and is it going to be locked to Oculus forever? Is there a chance it can move on?
It's coming out on Oculus Quest and Quest 2 initially, and then Rift, and then other platforms later on, hopefully.
Cool. That sounds great. Hey, Giles, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's really great.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for watching or listening to this interview from MinnMax. We have more on this channel. You can always subscribe and check them out. We'd appreciate it. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye. You can help support independent games media by subscribing to MinnMax on YouTube here, or you can support us over on Patreon to unlock exclusive shows like MinnMax Council. You can call into our podcast. You can put a picture of your choice on every MinnMax video, or you could have us plug your passion project on the MinnMax Show podcast. MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better, and we exist because of you. Any help telling a friend's appreciated.